Hello, and welcome back to the Your Everyday Strength podcast. My name is Josh Sternberg, and on today's episode, we do have with us a very special guest, Mr. Connor Walsh. Connor, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give the people a bit of an insight into who you are.
My name's Connor. I've been powerlifting for about 10 years, 10, 11 years. Love the gym, really, at heart. I'm just a gym rat who's been fortunate enough to turn the gym into a career. Pretty interested in athlete blood work and kind of performance-enhancing drug side of things and nutrition.
Yeah, short, sharp. I like it. So you said you've been powerlifting for a while now. How long have you actually been in the gym for? Because I think I saw a story the other day of you at like 16 or 17 or even younger.
Yeah. So I started training when I was 12. So I think we're coming up. I'll be 27 this year. So it'll be 15 years in the gym this year.
Predominantly bodybuilding at the start, or just fucking around, finding out?
Yeah, mainly weightlifting. I'm more weight loss oriented. It was a fat child, really. That was kind of what started it all.
Yeah, sweet, man. And you kind of mentioned in there that you're a big fan of, athlete blood work and things like that. And I know that originally when I first actually discovered you and discovered your page, it was, I can't even remember what the exact thing was, but it was exactly to do with that. It was to do with PED usage, blood work, internal health, and things like that. So I kind of wanted to give people a bit of an understanding about maybe the way in which your mind works with relation to, firstly, the role of internal health with relation to athletic performance, powerlifting, bodybuilding, etc. But then we can just, let it carry on from there and go into a little bit of the blood work side of things and things like that as well. So in terms of like the role of internal health with relation to athletic performance, where does that all come from for you? Where did the interest spark? What is it about it all that really drives your interest?
Look, initially the interest came from almost just self-preservation. I had some issues when I was younger, which led to hypergonadism. 10 years ago, doctors had zero interest in prescribing testosterone to anyone, let alone a teenager. Eventually, I decided that having a 8 to 10 total testosterone was not going to continue and that I was going to self-medicate. And at that point, kind of knew I was, over my head and kind of began researching to try and mitigate any potential risks that I would run into down the track without being able to kind of have the medical assistance that I probably should have had access to for that kind of condition. Obviously, I just kind of learnt to try and keep myself moving along. And then as things progressed and I got older, it kind of moved away from just the health side of things towards actually improving performance through looking at blood work. Blood work can be used for all athletes as a metric to track certain things and look for flaws within one's biology in which they can change things to improve oxygen delivering capacity or stuff of that nature can all be kind of found out in blood work as well. So not only is it there for keeping you healthy if you are in one of these more risky sports, but even just for your general sports, it is quite useful as well, just for optimizing for performance too.
Yeah, for sure, man. And with that, if we tie it together with relation to like the internal health for athletic performance and looking at the blood work, you've said for the people who are potentially a little bit more at risk, i.e. people using PEDs and things like that, it's something they should be on top of, obviously. But for just even general athletes, general powerlifters, trainers in general, what are some of the things within blood work and biomarkers and stuff like that that you actually look for out of everything, basically, or things that you see commonly out of whack?
So for non-athletes, just general day-to-day people, was that for?
Yeah, bit of both, predominantly. Like go non-athletes first, and then athletes if there's much of a difference, or.
Yep. Yeah, so there's definitely going to be a fair few differences between non-athletes and athletes. Look, unfortunately, we see lots of issues in general population at the moment. It's just not a super healthy time to be living. There's not necessarily one thing that I'm seeing more than others. Look, actually, I would probably say that lipid panels and glucose metabolism is two of the things that I'm seeing in general population that is quite commonly skewed. I think a lot of that comes from just a generally sedentary lifestyle that a lot of people are living these days, and poor nutrition choices that we're subject to as well. When we're kind of talking about athletes, there's quite a few areas where blood work should differ. Obviously, anything athletic based, especially if they're kind of hypermuscular athletes as well, you're going to see a lot more muscle breakdown, which is going to lead to certain things like lactate dehydrogenase to be high, creatinine, ALT, AS, plenty of other things that can skew just as a CRP, kind of any inflammatory markers, which are going to skew as a correct and healthy response to exercise. Obviously, keeping in mind that exercise is a acute stressor that causes changes and adaptations to your body in a positive nature, but the initial actual bout of exercising is still a stress. So you should see, certain stress-related markers and muscle breakdown markers being elevated in athletes, especially if they are training hard. Whereas obviously if you're seeing severe elevations in creatine kinase in a sedentary individual, you're more than likely looking at kidney issues, rhabdomyolysis or something of that nature. Whereas you will almost never see a creatine kinase in an athlete that is going to be within range. So the way that you would interpret one would be quite possibly serious life-threatening disease versus just trained. So there can be some very, very large differences in certain things like that.
Within that, actually, you mentioned ALT, AST, and things like that. I remember years and years and years ago when I first went to a doctor to get my bloods done. I was maybe 21, 22, and it was more just a generalized health check, blah, blah, blah. I went to a doctor, had been training. I quite literally had come from the gym to the doctor, sent me straight in to get the blood test. My ALT and AST came back through the roof. And he was like, oh, your liver's cooked. You need to go and do this. You need to go and have scans. And I was having like ultrasound scans. I had to go get sent to a liver specialist because they wanted to go and run more tests and things like this. And it quite literally, I was like, I've trained. Like I've trained. And I didn't know at the time that ALT and AST can be elevated due to muscle damage, due to training, things like that. And the doctor was essentially basically telling me that like my liver's fucked and we're going to go run and see specialists and all this sort of shit. So in that regard, how you kind of mentioned that there was no one helping you when you first did it. Have you seen a shift in doctors' understandings and interpretations of trained individuals and athletes, or is it still pretty shithouse?
Look, I think there has been a little bit more interest in people to specialize in athlete stuff. So I think there are more avenues if you want to get specific to go and see certain doctors that are kind of more researched in this area. But I think as like general health as a whole, general practitioners are still not very good at looking at these things. So yeah, look, if you're just going to a regular doctor, I don't think things have gotten any better, if not potentially even worse.
Perfect. Yeah, that doesn't even surprise me, to be honest with you. Then you were talking about before as well. Sorry, you go.
And also part of it's not always the doctor's fault. Medicare, if you are going for in Australia and you're using kind of the Medicare system, the government is really heavily cracking down on some of the tests that are ordered as well, which is kind of restricting GPs' ability to actually run sufficient tests to get good information back.
Yeah. Again, I can attest to being caught up in that. I've had a doctor who I've been working with for quite some time now, since I was about 23, 24. And he's quite good with everything. He has a little bit more of an open mind about his approach with relation to everything, training, all of that sort of stuff. And I remember him ordering me some tests one time, and he actually got in trouble and couldn't run. And it was purely getting my estrogen checked. He was told he wasn't allowed to have my estrogen checked more than once in a year because I'd already had it done a few months prior. I was experiencing issues with low testosterone at the time. Mine was actually at 5, at 24 years old. And I had every symptom you could possibly think of. Depression, no drive, no sex drive, no energy. I couldn't sleep. I was lethargic. I couldn't eat. I was every possible thing you could think of. And he basically told me, well, we can send you to an endocrinologist, but because I was still 110 kilos at that time, they're probably going to laugh you out of the room and tell you not to come back. And that was pretty much the extent of the help they could give. And he was trying to do the right thing by, helping me with the estrogen checks and things like that as well. And they cracked down on him. And I was just like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's getting tough.
which is where obviously private bloods and things like that come into work. Now, with that, if we've spoken about blood work, spoken about a couple of different markers that will affect athletes, general pop people, and things like that, with a bigger emphasis, and I think I've seen this myself on social media more than anywhere else. You're probably more caught up in this world than I am. Gut health, hormones, micronutrients, things like that. The way in which they all impact performance obviously differs, but I'm sure, and I know you're very big on this with relation to micronutrient intake and things like that. How, from a micronutrient perspective, can you or have you been able to or see changes in hormones and gut health and things like that instead of reaching for the fucking latest gut health supplement straight off the shelf? Is there obviously ways that we can fix all this sort of stuff without having to do that firstly?
Yeah, look, certainly for certain things. Obviously, there's certain things that are just going to require proper medical attention. Look, fiber is one of the biggest variables, I think, and it's not necessarily a one size fits all. I think that's probably going to be kind of your main dietary kind of needle mover, I guess, is finding what fibers work well with you, which don't bloat you too excessively, still provide enough kind of bulk and fluid in the GI tract to allow for healthy bowel movements. I find that often a lot of the modern diets, especially on the lower carb side, have a lot of wheat-based fibers in them, and I often find that excessive consumption of wheat-based fibers within the diet tends to cause digestive issues and GI distress. Maybe looking at things like where are your fiber sources coming from and trying some different types of fibers, maybe a little bit more soluble, a little bit less insoluble, maybe moving away from, if you are someone who consumes lots of your low carb breads or your low carb wraps and bagels and pastas, which are all typically a wheat-based fiber. Maybe if you are consuming a large portion of that fiber from those kind of sources, shifting some of it towards some psyllium husk and vegetables and fruits and seeing how your body responds to just the different types of fibers. Another big area would be from a dairy side, if you've got some lactose issues or just generally as well, for the probiotic and prebiotic content is, your Greek yogurts, kefirs, stuff of that nature. Sometimes if you have very mild kind of lactose intolerances, not full blown, shit yourself if you have a milk kind of thing, but if you're someone who gets a little bit of a kind of a slightly upset stomach from certain dairy sources, removing kind of your non-fermented forms of dairy and just starting slow with something like a kefir, Greek yogurts, stuff like that, can often kind of acclimatize your body a little bit better to digesting the dairies.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be one thing that you can look into there as well. And just generally incorporating these things into your diet for the probiotic and prebiotic content to feed that microbiome in the large intestine predominantly is also good. Sourdough breads, generally fermented foods in the diet. Proper electrolyte intake, fluid balance is important, not only in cells and your muscle tissue for hydration and everything like that, but also in your GI tract. You need fluid traveling into the GI tract correctly to have soft stools. Plenty of different little areas that you can look, but also, gut issues are individual and specific. So diagnosing the gut issue first is going to be the primary kind of concern before then you maybe look at more specialized outcome, or ways to treat that gut issue. Because there are obviously lots of different things that can cause problems within the intestinal tract.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And if for the people who may not be as well versed or have a bit of an understanding about it, you mentioned with relation to fiber types, soluble, insoluble. I know you did a post on this recently, but could you give like a little bit of just an insight as to what is soluble, what is insoluble, the difference between the two, and maybe some sources of them that people can actually check to see what they're having and what they're not having?
Yep. So soluble fiber is fiber that will dissolve in water, will solute in water or your stomach juices. This tends to draw a lot more fluid into the intestinal tract, makes your stool kind of softer and moist. Psyllium husk is a good way to get easy soluble fiber in. It tends to be quite easy on the stomach. It's what I have most of my clients use. And most fruits will also contain a portion of soluble fiber. Most fiber sources are going to have some of both. Certain sources are a lot heavier of one, but if you're consuming fruits and vegetables, you're usually going to get a fairly even mix of the two. Unsoluble fibers are obviously fibers that won't dissolve in water or your stomach juices. You tend to add more bulk to the stool and bring less fluid in. Stuff like cocoa, oats. Oats is also a pretty decent source of soluble fiber as well. And as I said, most vegetables are also going to contain some unsoluble fiber too. So both have benefits. Soluble fiber, I find if you're having kind of constipation and a lack of bowel movement, is probably a better way to lean for trying to sort out, those kind of constipation style type issues. But getting a balance of both is definitely important as well.
Yeah. And is there a particular sort of range that you look for in a day, like specifically some sort of number, either just overall fiber in general or maybe of each individual thing?
Yep. So somewhere between 10 and 20 grams of fiber per 1,000 calories is generally where I'll sit, which is quite a large range. And it's obviously going to depend on the individual and a little bit of kind of feedback from how they respond. Typically in dieting phases where you're trying to push for more satiety from the food, I'm going to have that up towards the 20 for most people. And then when you're moving into kind of higher caloric intakes, more often than not, fiber is going to come back down, maybe towards I would say an average. I don't really go towards the bottom end of the scale unless they are someone who just doesn't deal with fiber very well. But, for myself, for example, I would be around about 20 grams per 1,000 calories in a deficit phase. And then I'm probably going to be somewhere around about 12 to 16 per 1,000 when I'm, at a fairly high food intake. Also, just because obviously fiber does bring fluid and bulk into the GI tract, which can, make it a little bit more, increase feelings of satiety and kind of make you feel a little bit heavy all the time if you're consuming large amounts of food.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, for you, your higher caloric intake is probably like 2 to 3 times what any normal person would actually have anyway. But
yeah,
that it is what it is. The big boys need what they need.
big boys
Now,
gotta
with
eat.
that, exactly. What actually on that quickly? What is the highest calories you've had to go?
This was very specific. I was definitely having some GI issues at this time. Rates Gore had made a last minute entry to States, I think 2 or 3 years back, and I wasn't going to miss up. I was initially, 2 or 3 weeks out, and I was initially planning on competing the weight class down, but I wanted to have a crack at going head to head with him. So I decided last minute that we'd try and eat up, and I was 8,000 for about the last 3 or 4 weeks leading in there. And that was absolutely disgusting. I wouldn't share that diet as a nutritionist again. I was doing stuff like, the oak protein shakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd take like 3 or 4 sips out of them. I had no appetite by the time I finished training. So like my last meal of the day was like 3 or 4 of those, but I'd take drink like a third out of them and then fill it up with full sugar maple syrup and then shake it up again. I'd drink like half a bottle of maple syrup and like 3 of those. It was not nutritionist approved. That was terrible. But sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
No, but I think that is a really fucking important point on some of this stuff. And I have tried to make the differentiation between athletes, Gen Pop, etc., because I do know that the people who listen to this will be a very mixed bag of individuals. Now, there's a lot of times where, and especially common in Instagram, and I've seen a slight shift in it lately, but there's times where people might put up things that they've done, high amount of calories, or even on the other end of the spectrum, coming into a bodybuilding comp, etc., low amount of calories. And as a general population individual, they might see some of these things and be like, oh, well, fuck, that's what I have to do to get X, Y, Z, or that's what I have to do for this, right? But there needs to come an understanding that bodybuilding as a sport isn't healthy. Powerlifting as a sport, dependent upon the individual, the weight class they want to compete in, and the level at which they're competing in, probably isn't healthy. You've already said yourself that with relation to blood work and things like that, when we're looking at athletes versus Gen Pop, there's an allowance for skewed metrics to a degree within reason and things like that, right? What have you, and coming from somebody who does do content on Instagram and things like that, how have you found this to be received widely? Do you have many Gen Pop people who follow you, or is it predominantly specifically within the sports and things like that? And how do you sort of navigate those conversations with people?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. I do have a fair amount of Gen Pop. I think maybe more kind of people that are just trying to get healthier in general that follow as well. But yeah, it is because there are some polar opposites. I've got clients that are eating 6,500 calories, and then I've got clients that are on 1,500, and neither of them are doing anything wrong. It's exactly what both of them need, but that's 4 times the food. It's over 4 times the food for one person versus the other. Yeah, I don't know. Look, at the end of the day, I think people just really need to realize that a food intake is, for you, and that you can't look at what someone else is doing on social media. Like, I know one of the big things in social media is the kind of the hybrid athletes at the moment where, they're getting up and they might ride 20 Ks and then, they're eating 6,000 calories, but they get up and they ride 20 Ks and they go for a 10K run and then they spend an hour in the gym lifting. And I mean, if someone else thinks that they can do that whilst sitting on their ass in an office chair all day, then they're obviously going to be in for a bit of a rude awakening after a month or so.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I don't know. I don't really have a huge amount to say on that. I think it's really just comes down to people realizing that every individual is an individual, and that when you look to set up a diet, the last thing you want to be doing is just emulating what someone else is doing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's perfect. Pretty much exactly what I was kind of hoping you'd say on the matter, purely because of the fact I know myself personally, I haven't necessarily, I've not shied away from posting as much about what I'm eating and things like that as I used to. But there has been times where the peak calories I ever had to get to was like 6,500 when I was trying to eat up into the 125 kilo class. And that was over 1,000 grams of carbs a day. Most days, and not something I'm proud of, but most days it was about 500 grams of sugar, purely because by the end I was just so fucking done with eating. I was similar to you. I was just drinking whatever the fuck I could. It was juices, it was lollies, it was whatever could get down and I could digest without feeling like a fat sack of shit, basically. And I just stopped telling people because I was like, this is not healthy. Like, what I'm doing right now, 500 grams of sugar a day is fucking like probably 5 times what the average person should be having. And it wasn't something I wanted to glorify or make it seem like this is what you have to do these things. But yeah, it's interesting that people do see some of these stuff, and especially bodybuilders coming into comps and they're on fuck all calories, and it's like you'll see the chicks on Instagram be like, oh, I have to eat exactly like that. You probably don't.
No.
Just find a coach, find a fucking coach, find something that's going to work better for you and somebody that can actually help you do the things.
Yeah, because if you do end up eating like that, it's look, a lot of female bodybuilders are going to see disruption in hormone in their menstrual cycle, see severe changes in their hormone profiles. So I would say there's a fair bit of, especially on the female side, with the kind of bikini girls and stuff that are on Instagram sharing their diets. I would say there has been more than a few girls that have, with no intention to compete, ended up in similar situations from following diets such as a contest prep diet.
Oh, 100%, absolutely. And I think I have definitely seen a shift, or maybe I'm just following better people now, and I just started to unfollow the fucking idiots who will promote that sort of thing. But I've definitely seen more of a shift from that realm of my diet is for me. It is for a very specific purpose. I'm not going to tell you what I eat in a day. I will give you some ideas about meals or some different things like that. But that's definitely been a shift I've seen, which I think is 100% a positive thing, because there's no doubt in my mind that there's been fucking people completely fucked up by following someone else's diet and just not listening to their own body or finding the advice they need for them. We've spoken about this, and I know you and me have spoken about this a lot ourselves, but electrolyte balance, we were talking about it before, and you specifically mentioned potassium, sodium, things like that. Can you, again, similar thing like with the fiber, can you give people a little bit of an understanding about where you're at with that and things like that? If there are any specific recommendations, again, at a range per day, things like that?
Yep. Give a bit of ballpark and then kind of some ways that I would troubleshoot based on feedback. So for most people, somewhere around about double the potassium to sodium intake is where I would start. This is something I've changed on a little bit, especially in the athlete side of things. I used to push sodium a fair bit higher. And then kind of found we were constantly having issues managing blood pressure. So I have slightly adjusted kind of the way I go about things, possibly even since we spoke last on that podcast with the Nexus side of things. With most people, I'm going to start at around about two times the potassium to sodium, somewhere usually, and obviously this changes if you're quite overweight and carrying significant extra fat tissue, somewhere in the range of about 70 to 90 milligrams per kilogram of potassium, and that's total dietary potassium. And then obviously sodium at around about half that. If you're someone who lives in a very hot climate, so maybe you're up in the tropics, more often than not, sodium is probably going to want to come up a little bit higher because we do lose a greater portion of sodium in our sweat than potassium. So if you're either a profuse sweater or you just live in an environment where you're going to be subject to sweating frequently, then you may choose to kind of increase that sodium a little bit earlier straight out the gate. Typically, I started around about a 2-to-1. We'll see how they go, see if they start getting any cramps or anything like that during training, and see how blood pressure tracks. If they begin having issues with cramps during training, I typically will increase the sodium a little bit based off that. Same deal if they start having quite low blood pressure. That may be a sign as well that sodium is a little bit on the low end, then we need to bring the sodium back up. On the flip side, if blood pressure is quite high, it could be that potassium needs to come up a little bit further or the sodium needs to come down a little bit further. Calcium, generally, I have a pretty relatively standardized between about 800 and kind of 1500 milligrams for most people for calcium. Kind of obviously with your smaller individuals being more towards the lower end, and then your larger guys kind of being at 1000 plus. Magnesium, there is, I think, a little bit of variation here for magnesium as well. Magnesium can be quite a good tool for blood pressure regulation. And in cases where we're having issues controlling blood pressure, I can push magnesium up to 2,500 milligrams a day, which you will need supplementation to achieve in that kind of range. For most, about 1,000 milligrams to 1,500 milligrams of magnesium a day. Again, most people are probably going to need some form of magnesium supplementation to get into those ranges. As far as kind of your good magnesium sources from diets go, a lot of your leafy vegetables, cocoa is a really good magnesium source, also a pretty good potassium source as well. I typically tend to like predominantly magnesium glycinate with clients. If you're using a lot of magnesium, you're trying to save a bit of money, you could go with something like a magnesium chelate during the day, and then like a glycinate before bed, just because a regular chelated form tends to be milligram for milligram a good bit cheaper than glycinate. But generally, I would just pick a glycinate for the most part as far as a supplementational form there. I don't know. Is there anything else you want me to touch on there? Or
it's good in the sense of like the ranges with which you've actually recommended and things like that, because I know even myself, and I believe when I first reached out to you and we were having discussions around this, there's not a lot of literature around. It's just, the Australian Dietary Guidelines say adults need X amount, and it's basically just that. And sodium's the same. There's no real consideration for athletes. There's no real anything along those lines. But then from a sports nutrition perspective, there's definitely recommendations about sodium and things like that. And I've not seen as much education around potassium, calcium, magnesium, etc. So with that in itself, everyone pretty much knows how you can get sodium. Sodium is salt. If you don't know that, then start with that. Potassium, for example, and this is something I know you and me have spoken about quite a bit, but can you give me give the people a few of your favorite sources of potassium that are going to maybe tick a couple of boxes? Because I know you mentioned in there, cocoa has a lot of magnesium, also potassium. I know yogurt is quite high in potassium and also calcium. So it's like we're ticking a few boxes along the lines. Can you give a few other sources and things like that?
Yep. So Potatoes, sweet potatoes, pumpkin or great potassium sources, all good sources of fiber too. Also, your pumpkin and sweet potato are good vitamin A sources as well. As far as like really easy swaps that you can make, swapping out a table salt or whatever salt you're using for a heart salt or a light salt, which has a combination of sodium and potassium chloride. They're usually at roughly a 3 or 2 to 1 potassium to sodium ratio. So, obviously shifting the sodium intake down and increasing potassium intake quite easily. Another one which I have discovered kind of a little bit by accident fairly recently from doing some social media content and cooking is cream of tartar, which can be added to eggs, yogurts, pretty much anything liquid based. You can stir it in quite easily. It's a potassium based salt, and is a very easy way to add like 1,000 milligrams of potassium to a meal just by adding a little bit of that in. And we'll say that was a total accident. I was just cooking one day, doing some baking, making some cookies or something for some Instagram content, and plugged it into Chronometer. And I was like, holy shit, what have I been missing this all my life?
That's fucking awesome. I love that.
Very convenient little find there. Yeah, cocoa, great for magnesium, potassium, rich in polyphenols as well. Pomegranate juice, if you're someone who has a higher caloric intake, is another great one for potassium. Kiwi fruit, another very good potassium source as well as magnesium. Also, some recent literature has come out around kiwi fruit and potentially improving sleep around when consumed prior to bed. So that's something I have actually been experimenting with recently. Most fruits, watermelon is another pretty decent potassium source. Most of your fruits are going to be, fruits and vegetables will have at least some potassium in them as well. Tomatoes, tomato paste.
Yeah, and I know, what was it the other week that you put up? The sun-dried tomatoes or semi-sun-dried tomatoes or something that were just crazy high in potassium.
Yep.
I'm also a big fan of just coconut water as well. If I'm like
coconut water
feeling fucking lazy and I got the calories for the day, or actually post-footy predominantly. Yeah, sweet. Honestly, I think it goes to show as well, a lot of the sources that you were mentioning then have other benefits. So, they've got potassium, sodium, magnesium, fiber, all this sort of stuff that entails together. And I think it genuinely does highlight the importance of aiming for micronutrients and just getting your fucking fruits and vegetables in, really.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything you've said that's going to help us to keep healthy internally and keep some of that shit in check is fruit and veg.
Yep.
And I know for a fact that fucking so many people do not hit their minimum intakes per day. I know myself, I've been guilty over the years of the first thing that goes to the wayside when I'm on higher calories is my veg, because I'm like, oh no, I don't want more fiber, blah, 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 all the bullshit reasons. When, if anything, that's probably actually the time to get it in more for the micronutrient profiles and things like that.
Just looking at different ways to get in. Like for me, if you're going into a heavier food phase, cook your vegetables, cook them down. I mean, if you take a 100-gram bag of spinach, this big bag of spinach is like A4 size piece of paper's worth of spinach. You throw it in a pan, you cook it down, and it's like 3 spoonfuls of spinach and you're done. Same with tomatoes,
all these little fucking ways. Yeah, tomato paste and pizza sauce as well, I found out is actually pretty high. Again, because it's obviously derived from tomatoes. But when I found that out, I actually started adding pizza sauce to certain things. And it tastes fucking great for one. And then it also comes with the other benefit of obviously increasing potassium and things like that as well. So that's fucking awesome. A lot of actionable tips within that as well. But you've spoken a little bit and you've kind of briefly mentioned it a couple of times now with metrics and things like that. But what are some particular metrics that you actually get everybody that you work with to track, if there's any specific ones that you get everybody to track? And then is there, again, time between the Gen Pop and athlete thing, is there ones that you would get athletes to do that you don't necessarily need Gen Pop to do, etc.?
Look, I have certain Gen Pop guys that are just really serious. So it kind of depends on the individual and kind of where their kind of goals are.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone, I have tracked body weight daily. Body weight fluctuates. I run everything off averages. I don't care what your day-to-day weight is. I just want to see your weekly trends. I think that's very important, especially for females, because with a 28-day menstrual cycle, you are going to have big fluctuations from week to week within your cycle. So being able to look at even monthly trends as a female is quite useful. Because obviously with large hormonal swings you may see. Say the third week of the female cycle is quite often a week where progesterone and estrogen comes up, and along with it, so does fluid retention and generally a heavier, weaker weigh-ins. The second thing, I have everyone track blood pressure. My enhanced and more risk kind of seeking athletes doing so more frequently. But even my Gen Pop people, I still like to see a blood pressure once a week or so. I have sleep metrics usually tracked if possible. Generally just a subjective score. If they've got a wearable, then that can be also some decent information, not necessarily something I give a huge amount of weight to, but tracking trends if you've got wearables, that can be a good thing there as well. I incorporate nootropics and stuff of that nature into a lot of clients' programs as well. So what nootropic they took for the day, what time they took it, how their mental clarity and productivity was. And then certain people I also have tracked blood glucose, usually fasting, and then a 2-hour postprandial, but that is generally a more specific case. I don't have most people track blood glucose.
Okay, that blood glucose one is interesting. So if you don't get most people to track it, is that even enhanced individuals, you don't necessarily get them to track it, or do you only get them to do it if there seems like there might be some underlying issues going on? Or
so I'll have them look if they have a HbA1c that is well under wraps. I usually don't bother with it unless there's introduction of certain exogenous compounds that should elicit changes in blood glucose metabolism, like growth hormone or insulin.
Yeah, so you mentioned HbA1c, and you've mentioned a couple of different blood markers that you look for. Is there any that if somebody was going to go and, even if they were to get them done themselves or whatever, is there any particular ones that are not a part of a standardized test that you get most people to do?
Specific to blood glucose or just general?
Just in general, really. Like anything that, if I was to go in right now and say, I just want, as a male, just a general hormone check or whatever, is there any ones that you would get on top of that you get most people to get that wouldn't normally be a part of a normal test?
If they are a larger individual, I pretty much always will have them do a cystatin C, especially if they're also training, just because that is a kidney marker that is very sensitive, that removes muscle waste from the equation, removes creatinine from the EGFR equation. It gives you a result that is not skewed by muscle breakdown. It's much more accurate as well as sensitive, so it generally will pick up kidney issues earlier. I would like to check full thyroid panels in most people. Most normal labs will only check a TSH, which doesn't give you a whole lot of information by itself. Usually like to see at least a T3 and T4, but I think it's worth testing antibodies at least once every couple of years for most people as well. And I would have all clients on an onboarding blood test to check their antibodies, their thyroid antibodies on the onboarding test. Reverse T3, as far as thyroid function goes, is another one that's pretty good to check, at least not necessarily every blood test, but every year or two maybe. Just T4 converts obviously into T3 and can also convert into RT3 when there is the iodine molecule removed, and reverse T can bind to the same receptor sites as T3 does, which then inhibits T3's action on the receptor. And you may be normal thyroid status, but if you've got elevated reverse T3, the T3 is not able to have its correct impact and you get hypothyroid symptoms. Not commonly checked, and that one is out of pocket, as is the cystatin C, so you'll have to pay for both of those regardless. I don't know. As far as just general pop, what I class as a normal blood work is probably not what a doctor classes as a normal blood work anymore. So I've seen some pretty horrendous things where you go in for full bloods and they're right up a liver function, kidney function, and a blood count, and that's all you get. But all your basics: kidneys, a normal UAC panel, your liver, a full liver function test, a full blood count, a full lipid panel, so triglycerides, LDL, HDL, non-HDL cholesterol. If you can, check an ApoB, which is the sum of all your atherogenic cholesterol particles, and then a lipoprotein A, a lipoprotein little a, because there is actually a lipoprotein big A, and they're completely different, so make sure it is the little a when you test this. Is another one, and you only ever have to test that once, as it is currently unmodifiable, so it's a genetic risk factor. You're either at high risk or, obviously a kind of sliding scale from there. Again, not something you can directly change, but if you know you're in the higher risk category, you can make lifestyle adjustments to try and mitigate some of the other things that contribute to the same risks.
Yeah, sweet. That's fucking pretty extensive. And yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that your generalized blood check versus a GP's or anything like that is fucking going to be vastly different. But again, that is why there's probably been such an uprise in people actually seeking external help with all of this sort of stuff and wanting to be a little bit more proactive on their health issues, which is a big thing that I know I'm pretty big on myself. And fortunately, I do, as I said, I do work with a GP who much prefers to be proactive rather than reactive. So tries to push the edge a little bit about what he does and what he can check and things like that for me, which is great. But there's quite a lot of people who obviously are not in that same basket and don't have that available to them. Something that was actually really interesting that you were talking about before with most of your clients is the use of nootropics. Now, nootropics are something that I have used off and on for basically as long as I can remember. Being diagnosed with ADHD a couple of years back and now utilizing dexamphetamine, I don't use them as much anymore. But what are maybe some of the more common nootropics that you might use with some of your clients on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so obviously it's going to kind of depend on what the client's looking for specifically from a nootropic, because there's not necessarily all have the same properties. But generally, the two that are most commonly used for both myself and clients is modafinil or some kind of variant of modafinil, armodafinil. There's a few other ones out there now as well. Typically on days where you just need to be able to sit down and work all day, I typically will use modafinil personally, maybe 2 to 3 times a week on my highest kind of mental output days. I respond extremely well to modafinil personally. Some people find them to be a little bit too much. Often just half a tablet, so usually about 100 milligram modafinil is sufficient for most people. I've even had clients that get terrific results from a quarter of a tablet, just 50 milligrams of modafinil. So don't necessarily have to go straight to a full tab or a 200 milligram one. I would suggest if you do go down the modafinil route to start low and work your way up. And if you are going to be using them frequently, I would probably suggest trying to keep the dose lower. And I do also like, if you're going to be using or wanting, if you're someone who, like yourself, who's a online person who's got to be working and productive all day, and especially when, you're at home and there's more distractions around and shit. If you're going to be using nootropics daily, I would have a rotation that you can move through. I never really try to use the same nootropic back-to-back days, unless maybe I've just got 2 days of work where I'm absolutely smashed and modafinil's what it needs to be for that day. But I like to rotate in a couple of other ones. I'm a big fan of Samax. I find with clients it is hit and miss with response to Samax. I only really get good results from Samax at slightly higher doses, around about 1,000 micrograms plus. But some people get really good results at 300 to 500 micrograms a day. Solank is another really good one, which I've used with quite a few clients and one that I have in quite regularly. It's very good anxiolytic, so controlling anxiety. It does have some more minor kind of cognitive benefits from a productivity standpoint, but in terms of just kind of calming you slightly but keeping you sharp and reducing feelings of anxiety, I definitely think it's quite good, and I've had clients have very, very good responses to the Solank. It's been near on life-changing, I would say, for a couple of clients in dealing with certain situations and anxiety-related things, especially those that aren't willing to look into some of the more traditional pharmaceutical routes, with your benzodiazepines and stuff like that.
Yeah, sweet. I like that. What are your thoughts on alpha GPC?
Yeah, great. Definitely. I think alpha GPC should be in pretty much most people's protocols. If you're a strength athlete, I think you're missing out if you're not using alpha GPC pre-workout. It's one of few supplements that has proven strength outputs, or proven legal supplements that has proven outputs in strength along with caffeine. Yeah, big fan of choline in general, and also ensuring that you have enough choline within the diet to just support healthy brain function and stuff like that as well. Even injectable choline, I quite like.
That's actually super. I had no idea that it had been proven benefits to increase strength. I just used to love that in combination with nicotine before I was medicated. That used to be my homemade Dexies, I guess you could say, is fucking nicotine and alpha GPC to get me through. And for years I used that. There's been so many different ones come and go since I very first ever had any form of fucking nootropic way back in the day. But alpha GPC has probably got to be one of the ones that has just been there the whole time. So big fan of that. I love that. Yeah,
It
that
works well with other things. You can take it with everything. Like alpha GPC is great with your cholinergic stimulants because you're going to deplete choline stores. Alpha GPC is going to help keep that choline topped up, because what the cholinergic stimulants are doing is effectively increasing your body's utilization of choline. So you're going to run through your stored choline a lot quicker. So you're actually generally best using a choline supplement of some sort like alpha GPC when you are taking these more aggressive cholinergic stims.
in terms of cholinergic stims, can you give a couple of examples?
Modafinil, even androgens, even if you're taking androgens along the lines of like Masteron or Trenbolone or any of these drugs that have upregulations of the cholinergic pathways, the drugs that typically tend to drive a lot of strength, even those are also going to do the same things. I believe I think most of your amphetamine-based drugs are cholinergic, so your Dexies, your Vyvances, stuff of that nature as well. Probably have to double check that, but I'm 99% sure they're all cholinergic-based stimulants too, and obviously very widely used as well.
Yeah, well, I use them. So it's like the one permanent solution I kind of had back in the day. But no, that's actually super interesting about that. As I said, I love alpha GPC, so I'm glad it's in there. Now, I have a question around like people dealing with injuries, and I know that this is something you yourself have been dealing with at the moment and for a little while and things like that. We'll try and be a little bit more specific with relation to maybe like ligament, tendons, things like that, and then muscular. But is there anything within the role of nutrition, diet, etc., even maybe supplementation that is more or less a go-to for you for somebody experiencing your common things like your tendinopathies, your fucking all of that sort of stuff that we see with the more wide variety of people?
Not really. Not if they're someone who's already working with me, there's nothing I'm really going to change if they get injured, typically, other than maybe just controlling calories based on any reduction in activity. But I don't think anything beyond a normal, well-rounded, nutritious diet is really needed in the form. As in, like, I don't think if you need to change your diet because you got injured, your diet prior probably wasn't very good. I don't think there's necessarily anything that a lifting athletic person shouldn't already be incorporating in their diet that they then need to incorporate if they got injured. Maybe a little bit more protein potentially, maybe some collagen supplements. If it was a cartilage-based issue, I may go something, really anything collagen-based, but like vitamin E's, vitamin C's can both have improvements in collagen production. That might be something I would supplement in possibly. But yeah, not too much really. You know, obviously, if you've come from a point where your diet was shithouse, you weren't eating any protein, you weren't hitting any macros, then definitely we're going to make some changes. But I would really pretty much just be putting you onto the same kind of diet that I would have any of my athletes on, just quite possibly a different caloric intake, because you know, if you're injured, you're probably not doing as much as you were prior to the injuries.
Yeah, no, sweet. And you mentioned in there collagen. Now, what is your? It's hard because I see collagen get a bad rap online sometimes. Some people say it's fucking useless. Other people say it's great. Obviously, you suggest it potentially dependent upon the individual. Where are you at with that and things like that?
Look, logically, collagen supplements don't make any sense, especially if you have sufficient protein intake. There's already going to be sufficient availability of those amino acids almost always if you're consuming a gram per pound or more of protein anyway. So it's not like you're running into a supply issue of the amino acids that the collagen is providing. Do I think it's going to hurt if you've had a severe injury and you're taking everything else and you're on BPC and you're on TB, you're on Pentosan, you're on all these other drugs that are upregulating collagen production? Maybe there's some logic to increasing the building blocks for that collagen in the first place in case you do run into a substrate issue. It's not super expensive. I mean, honestly, you could probably get the majority of the benefits of a collagen supplement just from regular old gelatin anyway. But look, personally, I don't think there's a huge benefit to collagen supplements. It's certainly not going to hurt. It is an inferior form of protein when we're talking about muscle protein synthesis. So I certainly wouldn't go changing your entire daily protein intake over from whatever it is to collagen protein because you've got injured. But I don't think it would hurt to consume a scoop, a serve of collagen, in the case of an injury where collagen production is wanting to be upregulated, but I also don't think you're probably going to get a huge benefit from it either.
Yeah, no, cool. I wanted to bring up collagen purely because of the fact it seems like it's the not more so latest, but like one of the more later buzzwords that a lot of supplement companies and a lot of brands are releasing. Oh, collagen protein water and collagen this and collagen that, and this, targeted towards females is going to help hair, skin, nails more. And I can see from the sense of like a marketing perspective, yeah, but you pretty much nailed it there with relation to just hit your fucking protein intake.
Yep.
And go from there. Because to hit your protein, hit your macronutrients. Pretty straightforward. Yep. The basics work. No, that's awesome, man. Honestly, I think that's we've covered a fair bit, and I think there's a lot of things within there that are actually going to be actionable for people to take away from this. If you want to take a second, give us, plug your Instagram. Where can people find you? Where can people find information that you provide? Things like that. Is there any resources you recommend or anything like that?
Yep. So you can find me on Walsh Strength and Nutrition on Instagram. I've got a small YouTube channel, Walsh Strength and Nutrition as well. If you want to go over and check that out. Post most of my content through Instagram. If anyone wants to reach out to me by email or anything like that for questions or a consult or anything, you'll be able to find links in the Instagram bio. Yeah, that's really it for me.
Fuck, easy. I love that. You're a content king now. I know we've both laughed at the start of since the start of the year. It's definitely seen an increase from both of us, which is great. It's hard at first. It really is.
Yeah, you're doing a good job. You're putting out heaps of content. I see you churning it out.
I've got to trying to stick on top of it, consistency or some shit, right?
Well, I was just going to ask about the content creation. What you're finding is kind of being successful and keeping you going and keeping it churning out?
Mixed bag of everything, but understanding almost similar to what we look at from training, nutrition, etc. Right? Like we go to the gym, we eat, we do all this shit with no instant result. It's the delayed gratification. And I've definitely seen that with content. For me, there's no I've posted one piece and it's all of a sudden I'm blown up. I'm fucking Instagram famous and I have thousands of inquiries a week. It's just been a steady trickle of increasing. And, when I first went back out on my own last year, that was definitely an area I lacked in. So similar to when we tell people to get a fucking coach, I went and got a coach who maps out all my marketing and things like that and creates an approach for me and just says, this is what we're doing for the next 2 weeks. And we go through and do it and provide feedback, results, metrics. We're tracking all that shit too. And then we just continue on that plan and tweak and adjust as necessary. Really awesome. No different to
definitely working.
Yeah, it's been good. And it's one of those things that I think without having done that, I probably wouldn't have had the confidence to do the podcast. And it's super funny that it was actually one of a conversation I had with you where you straight up said, if you launch a podcast again, I'll come on as a guest. That actually put the idea in my head to be like, I probably should just do the thing that I want to do and have wanted to do for a while. And so, that I don't even know if you know that, but that was actually one of the main reasons that sort of trickled along as the starting pathway to actually being here where we are right now.
Yeah, stoked. Awesome,
yeah, it was cool. I thought you'd like that. Now, before you head off, because you've given a lot of people a lot of advice so far, I've got 3 questions that I'm going to be asking every single guest who comes onto the show. Now, for question 1, try and think straight off cuff. Don't really think too long about it. But if you could tell your younger self one thing, what would it be?
Yeah, look, be patient. Really. Actually, you know what? I wouldn't. I don't. Look, I made mistakes when I was young, and I probably would change things. But honestly, I think it was important in the path that I ended up on. So, looking back in hindsight, you know what? I wouldn't even say anything. I'm happy with how things turned out. I made mistakes that I would tell other people in my situation not to repeat. But honestly, the way things have played out, I fortunately have avoided a lot of potential issues, and I've learned a lot along the way. So, you know what? I'm actually quite content with the mistakes that my younger self made, because they have helped my older self.
I fucking love that. I love that. And I think I have a very similar mindset that basically everything good, bad, ugly, brilliant has all led to this moment exactly where we are right now. And without all of that,
100%.
may not be here. You may not be
Yep.
doing what you're doing. I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing right now. And I think that's definitely fucking a good way to look at it. Now, one that's a little bit less deep, but favorite dog breed / animal,
I'm a Staffy
if you're not a
guy.
fan of dogs. Staffies?
I love dogs. No, I got 2 dogs. I love Staffies. I love all dogs.
Perfect. And what about your
What
favorite
about
animal?
you?
Oh, I'm a dog. I got a cocker
What?
spaniel, bro. That's my child.
Yeah. I'm the same. Yeah, I'd probably be dogs. Dogs would have to be my
Perfect.
favorite animal.
Good man. And one final thing, but a single mindset shift technique or quote that helps you, just if you are ever feeling overwhelmed, feeling maybe down or unmotivated or something along those lines. Is there just one particular mindset shift technique or quote that helps you?
Look, as far as calming down, I do like breath work. And let's go, cunt is about as good as it gets for me when it's time to get ready to go and get firing. A bit of self-loathing and swearing at yourself always goes a long way, I find.
I love it. Whatever works. The breathwork thing's good. I like that. It's fucking pretty common one.
Yeah, so I have a lot harder time chilling out than getting up. I'm pretty good at getting myself revved up.
Sick. I love that. Perfect. Well, my man, thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you for having
Appreciate
me,
you being
Josh. It's
here.
great.
And we'll definitely talk soon.
Yeah, for sure. Look forward to it.